Thank you for your patience. We're about to begin this service for Mr. John Buryl Lazar. I want to welcome everyone here at the chapel as well as those viewing online. Just a gentle reminder for those of you present here at the chapel, if you have a cell phone with you, please place it in the silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. Officiating is Rabbi Ari Hart from Skokie Valley, Agudith Jacob of Skokie.
We're gathered here today to remember John Buryl Lazar, Yonatan ben Dovber, devoted son of the late Buryl and Zelda, loving brother, Rabbi Jeffrey and Joan, dear uncle, beloved uncle of David and Michael and Ariella and Yael. We have a job to do together today, which is to perform chesed shel emet, loving kindness of truth. In the Jewish tradition, it teaches that when there is a loss, the community has a responsibility to gather together and perform this act of loving kindness of truth. Why is it called a loving kindness of truth? The traditional explanation is because what we're going to do today, we're going to share and listen and revere and honor and respect John. It's a loving kindness of truth because there's nothing he can do to repay us. This is just pure. It's pure love and respect for someone who touched so many lives. Perhaps there's another dimension of the loving kindness of truth today, though, which is that John was a man of truth, someone who spoke his truth, who shared truth with others, who helped other people see the truth, who opened people's eyes to truths. So I think it's fitting that together we do this loving kindness of truth, very much in the spirit of what he was for so many people. As I mentioned, it's a communal effort. In the Jewish tradition, mourning happens in the context of community. It's not done alone. It's something we go through together and share and listen and hold one another through. So this morning we'll be hearing words from Joan, John's sister, from Ariella, who will read Yael's remarks, who's joining us from Israel, and then Ariella, who will share her own thoughts, and then friends, John and Taryn, Nancy and Richard Hartman, Sima Blue and Bobby Diamond, Holly Cahan, Judy Hale, and then concluding with words from Rabbi Jeffrey Lazar, really much in the spirit of someone who touched and taught and inspired so many people. We'll hear different angles of John's life, different truths, different loving kindnesses that he represented from the community that's gathered here today. So we'll begin this morning with Joan sharing some reflections.
Welcome, everybody. Something weird happened this morning when I came here, and I was in the office and preparing to settle up our bill. I pulled out what I thought was my remarks, but it was a blank sheet of paper. So I had to race back home and take pictures of my remarks, and so I'm not quite sure how this is going to go on the phone, but let's give it a try. I'm Joni, John's younger sister. On behalf of my family, I would like to thank you all for coming, either in person or via the live stream. We are so glad that you decided to participate in this tribute to John. What to expect? There will be a number of brief words by family members and friends, and then there will be plenty of time for you to share your memories, either with us family members or with friends and colleagues, or all of the above. We have plenty of time, and that's a great way to fill it. We have already received a large number of emails from friends and colleagues from all over the world, and it's been exciting and gratifying to realize what an impact John had on so many lives. My brother Jeffrey has gathered a number of the messages into a booklet which will be available for you to read and take home with you if you so wish. It's a lovely way to keep John's memory alive. What special place did John have in my life? Growing up as the youngest with two older brothers, I didn't particularly connect with either of them. It was only as adults that things began to change. As we both matured, we found common ground and began to grow closer. The formerly unsurmountable age gap was surmounted. By the time I had kids, we had grown closer still. But the real closeness began later on in the last 20 years or so. When I separated from my now ex-husband, John was there to give support and a sympathetic ear. When our mother died, we had the luxury of closing up the apartment together in a leisurely fashion. While many people have to do this alone and have just a few weeks at best to do it, we had the unbelievable luxury of having almost a year. We got together each Sunday, putting in a good number of hours, going through the apartment over and over, debating what to keep and what to let go of. That generated a lot of memories. We ended each Sunday with dinner together at a local restaurant where the talking continued. Serious bonding was going on. When John became ill a few years ago, the Sunday afternoons together continued at his place, and when I unfortunately also fell ill, John turned around and came to my place for our weekly get-togethers. When I was in the hospital just a year ago getting a stem cell transplant, John shaved his head in solidarity with me, more than once. I have photographic proof of us two baldies. When I returned home, we continued our Sunday routine. The TV was always turned to some kind of sports event that he followed far more avidly than I did, or occasionally a wild game of casino, which I often won. When I was finally permitted to go out to restaurants just a few months ago, we had a gay old time debating various eating options. Unfortunately, that didn't last long before he declined precipitously and went first to the hospital and ultimately to hospice. But as long as John was able, he kept the cheerleading and pep talks going and helped me to look at things in a more positive light. I'll always be grateful for what a wonderful brother he became. I long for our daily evening phone calls and our Sunday visits. I miss you, John. Sundays just aren't the same without you.
Another unrequested learning opportunity, as John would say. Michael, his nephew, son of Joan. There are many times and many ways in which John was of wise counsel to me and many in this room and around the world. He even wrote a book, co-authored many books on perspective, and was, for that, he practiced. He was not just a man of theory. He came to our house almost every weekend, almost every holiday, was a fixture at our table. When I married my wife, Emma, he joined us at our table and was a fixture there too. I'm 34, going on 35 now, and I've had a few stages of life for which my uncle was always a part of. He was very kind and patient, and I do not take for granted the ways in which he was with me, period. There are, in my mind, no greater gift than just being present with someone and showing up for who they are. At family meals, we would often be seen huddled on the side, just conferring about life, or as he liked to call it, the big game. And what's going on? What are you seeing? How does that feel? What's your strategy here? What does that make you feel like? And whether it would be then or on phone calls or meeting up, he was a constant. And I know for many in this room and elsewhere, he was that way too. One brief memory that I'll share is that while I very much appreciated his presence with me, that's me. I don't, assume what that's like for anyone else. But I was extremely heartened, to say the least, when my wife, Emma, also thought John was a person to confide in as well. And numerous times I'd be there, or just them on their own, lean on him for support. And I haven't found the words for it, but it was something very touching that he continued to open himself to be of counsel and be present to those who needed it, family and friends. And also in the spirit of giving, he was an avid wine collector, and there's some outside, and we hope that you'll take some with you on your way out. But as we say, may his memory be a blessing, and one of the many memories that will be a blessing is his presence and the questions of how to live life, and a life well lived. Thank you all for being here.
Next, we'll hear some words from Yael, read by Ariella.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ariella, John's niece and Joan's daughter. And this is a beautiful speech that my sister wrote, who's in Israel. When you have a family as small as ours, family gatherings are intimate and special. With our weekly Sunday night dinners at Grandma's, John was a constant fixture. His sophisticated palate and savviness in the kitchen always elevated every meal. We looked forward to his delicious fruit salads and interesting salads that always left us guessing the secret ingredients. He also was known for enjoying every morsel and languishing over meals, sometimes to the distress of others who were more on the clock. A hilarious and telling family legend is when my dad, a typical impatient Israeli, tried clearing John's plate from the table. John was most certainly not finished, and a tug of war apparently ensued. When my daughter Noah, a bright and feisty almost 2-year-old, eats her meals, I always chuckle to myself that she inherited John's love and appreciation of food. Not only do her meals drag on, but she is very vocal, sprinkling mms and yums in between bites and eating with a most definite Buryl Lazar gusto. Genes are a beautiful thing, and I relish in the pieces of him that she has in her. John will be sorely missed for his witty banter, quiet intelligence, and devotion to those he loved. And just to add upon that, I think that the part about John that I appreciated the most was his constancy. When I think back to the myriad Shabbat dinners or holidays or anything of significance really for the family, he was always there and always so game to participate and connect to whatever was meaningful to the others in the room, connect to the people that were there. I remember during our Friday night dinners, we would always sing 2 Hebrew songs, Shalom Aleichem and Esher Chayil. And he didn't know all the words, but he would always hum along and do little dances and funny noises. And he was so cute, but just like, it showed how much he just wanted to participate and be there with us. And I'm so grateful to have had him in my life. And I love him so much. And we will miss him.
Such beautiful memories from family. So moving. We'll hear some words now from friends. John and Taryn Staub, old friends of John's.
So John was a fixture in our house as well. And my daughter considers him Uncle John also. I think, so my husband John and John, so as I say things, it may be a little, but there's a lot of ways that they're alike. And they're both very intentional. John always wrote hand cards for special occasions. Our birthdays, our anniversaries, there would always be a card. It was interesting, even just signing the guest book, it says relation. And I'm like, well, I get, like, what's the relation? Like, you know, like, it's more than friends. It's family by choice, right? John always chose his attitude of how he was going to approach anything. And he did that with this last battle of, you know, I think for him to lose his sense of taste and to have things but he kept cooking. And he'd drop off soup and he'd say, let me know how it tastes, because I can't tell. Did I put enough or too much? He always had a recipe ready. Like, we'd get together to cook. And he'd say, what do you want to make? And I'm a last-minute person. Ask me what's for dinner 20 minutes before, and I might have an idea. And so he would call on Monday before we were going to get together Friday or Saturday to plan our menu. I'd say, well, do you have any recipes you've been wanting to try? And he always had at least one that he was ready. And so one of the things Jennifer picked were some cookbooks of Uncle John's. And so we plan to enjoy making some recipes together. And if you want to come join, we'd love to have you.
Unlike my wife, I can't just wing it. I've got to write it down. So my name is John Staub, and I'm here to remember and honor John. We've been good friends for over 20 years, probably closer to 25. He's only been gone a little over a month, and I already miss him so much. I will miss John on Sunday mornings when we have our small group Bible study meeting, which John was a part of for several years. The guy was something. He showed up every Sunday morning, no matter if he was in the hospital or at home or on the other side of the world. He would show up 7 o'clock Sunday mornings. And he showed up no matter where he was. So I could count on him to show up not only then, but in life. For me, he was someone who just always showed up. He wasn't a man of convenience. He was an unreasonableness about him that's beyond ordinary. When our son died and when my dad died, John was there, showed up again. So I will miss John on Super Bowl Sundays and New Year's Eve get-togethers, which we always were together for. I'll miss John coming to our house and cooking in our kitchen with my wife, Taryn, which she referenced. He always had a good recipe for something new to share with us. We'd have lively debates and great conversations. He loved good food and good conversation. So I'll miss John on Saturday mornings when we'd often meet for breakfast and have great conversations. Although our faith backgrounds are different, we always found common ground and shared values. We both recognize God to be loving and just toward us. We both love the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will miss receiving loving handwritten notes from John on special occasions. And I'll miss talking with him about the Cubs and the other Chicago sports teams. The last thing I'll say is that I'm grateful to have had John in my life. I'm a better man because of him.
Next, we'll hear some words from Nancy and Richard Hartman.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I first ran into John at a conversation about learning from each other. And that was 30 years ago. And we've kept up a lot of contact since that time, usually in the form of breakfast where we could get someone else to cook for us rather than someone like Taryn who would cook. He listened deeply. He wanted to share himself in the dealing with the great game of life. He played hard, and he played well. You say something? Okay.
You okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm kind of a spectator in some of John's friendships. John and Richard have been friends for over 30 years, and John was always around, and the two of them would make fun of me because I was always working. So, it was like, going out with John, fine, see you later. And they spent a lot of time together. But over the last 4 or 5 years, I think COVID was very, very hard on everyone. And John particularly was devastated by the restrictions, by the limitations that were put on everybody. And he was always more worried about those limitations on his friends and his family than he was. I feel very, very privileged that John shared things with me that I don't believe he shared with most people. His vulnerabilities, sometimes his sadness and his feeling of being alone. John desperately wanted to have everyone in his life, and in those moments when he felt alone or didn't quite know where to turn, I was very gifted that John would call me, and as he would say, give me shit. And so we would talk about life, and John never complained about anything on his own. He was always much more worried about what was going on with everybody, with Joan, with you, with Barbara, and all that. He was always very, very concerned. I was shocked when John found out that he had cancer, and he called me and said, will you help me? I didn't know what that meant, and absolutely. During those months when John was first diagnosed, to be included in his decision-making and stuff, to me, was the greatest privilege. And the fact that he said, help me through this. John's faith, John's commitment to his beliefs carried on into his treatment, and his need to not back out, his need to not come across as vulnerable, his need to not discuss with anybody, this really sucks, and I'm really afraid. So I feel very privileged that John shared that, and that we were able to share hours and hours of his time telling me how much he loved you, how much he loved you, how much he loved all of you. And that was a huge gift to me. So I appreciate that you've all shared John with us for a very, very long time, and know how special, down to the very, very last couple days. The sports channel was on, and he wanted a report of how the basketball game was, Sweet 16, down to 8, down, and it would be one finger. When it was only one finger that he could still move, he was commenting on the games. Thank you.
Sima Blue and Bobby Diamond will share some words now.
I'm Seema, and I am one of John's oldest friends. Not chronologically speaking, but I just wanted to point that out for everybody. Well, John, our nearly 50-year friendship has come to an end. We have seen each other through relationships, marriages, divorces, births, deaths, jobs, loss of jobs, and later through medical challenges. You were at both of my weddings and my daughter's weddings. I was not invited to any of your weddings. What was up with that? Anyway, I have known you longer than anyone other than your brother or sister. So I can comment on my favorite period of time with John, which was the early years. Why? Well, the younger John was more lighthearted, joyous, playful, and spontaneous. We didn't take ourselves all that seriously. We were in our 20s, for God's sake. We met in the mid-70s when we worked together. We became friends and confidants, and when neither one of us had a date on a Saturday night, we were each other's plus ones. And we would go to plays and concerts and out to restaurants. Of course, restaurants. After work, we could go to one of those ubiquitous fern bars in our neighborhood, because we lived in a trendy place. And we would nurse White Russians. Actually, one each because we weren't big drinkers, so. But we were so cool and we were so sophisticated sitting there doing that. We went to the midnight showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And for those of you who are millennials, Google it. And we would toss white bread up in the air, like everybody else. We took a road trip to glamorous Springfield in your attempt to strike up a romance with a person that had given a seminar to our work group. I was enlisted to verify that this was purely a professional endeavor until you found some way to ask her out. Unfortunately, you were not all that successful on that one. On my birthday one year, you came to work first thing in the morning, bearing a dozen long-string red roses for me. I shared an office with 4 other people, and boy, did tongues wag that day. People had decided that we had some major, huge romance brewing. But no, it was a birthday surprise, and you bestowed that on me. You loved those little gestures, those surprises. As Taryn mentioned, you always remembered a birthday or an anniversary or a holiday. And cards weren't simply signed John or just love John, but rather a wish for joy or tranquility and abundance. And let's get another date on the calendar to cook. You found Landmark, and with it, a new source of inspirations and friendships. You wanted me to also join. I said no. You also asked a couple more times and got the same response. You then went off to Kellogg School of Business and onto your coaching career, and you collected colleagues and contacts worldwide. Although we were very close friends, we viewed the world differently. And as we would remind each other repeatedly, we processed the world in very different ways. I am the direct, analytical, and empirical one, and you see the world with very fluid borders and million shades of gray. After much foot stomping, on mostly my part, we had to agree to disagree, especially when you were first diagnosed and about to meet with your medical team. I asked you whether you had a list of questions to ask the doctors. When I was first diagnosed, I walked in with 21 questions and had a family powwow the day before to see if anyone else could think of another question. Your response, however, was no. And I could not believe that and said, "Are you kidding me?" And you said, "I will find out as I go along. They will tell me what I need to know." That to me was totally incomprehensible. But as Joe would say, you were probably thinking, and now the adventure begins. There were days that we would cook together. Obviously, many of you know of this. And you would arrive with bags and tools and pots and pans looking like a one-man band. Every burner had vessels bubbling away, creating several course feasts that would represent a certain cuisine or region or geographical/historical cultural path. That was my contribution. You were at our table for each of the major holidays. My grandkids thought of you as Uncle John. And my granddaughter asked whether you were the one who had made the fruit salad without the ginger. You missed the last holiday, Passover. But the little flowered, festooned purple elephant from India sat on the table. You brought it from your trip to India, and it instantly made me smile. It is a small 3x4 little figurine that always has a place in the middle of our dining room table. As Marie Canto would say, it brings me joy. For those of you beyond millennial, Marie Canto is a viral organizational whiz who recommends that if something does not bring you joy, you should get rid of it. The little purple elephant brings me joy. I walk by it several times a day. At Passover, there was an empty chair. But the elephant sat on the table with its flowered purpleness. Maybe in some form you were there. I never really thought about the nature of our relationship. It just was. We laughed, we bickered, we discussed. Sometimes I needed some space or wanted to reach to the phone line and shake you and say, "What are you thinking, John?" But the next evening, we would speak again. You would call Joni and me each day. I asked my daughter, Abby, how she saw our relationship, and she said, "It seemed like a brother and sister." And that feels about right. But now there are no more evening phone calls or agreeing to disagree. Only you would know whether you are on to your next adventure.
Why do I feel like I'm at circuit court? Is somebody on trial? No. I'm Seema's better half. That's why my speech is going to be half as long as hers. That being said, the king of condiments. I'm glad in the back there's some people who appreciate that. Whenever John would make, and this is over a series of years, I don't know where the guy got the time to do it, but he'd make his almost daily call to us. It was almost always precisely at dinner time. We were just sitting down, or you had that first mouthful of food, and the phone went off. Now, you didn't quite know who was calling, so you had to make a judgment call. It's John, got to get up, let the food get cold. So anyways, and almost invariably, I could tell that it was going to be John due to the indeterminate nature of when he'd say, something, or at least anything. Because you go, "Bobby?" "Oh, John, it's you." Okay. "What's on the turntable?" I don't know why he said that. He knew I was a musician, but I said, "It's not on the turntable anymore, it's on Alexa." And that's how we retrieve our music these days. I don't really think it's so wonderful, but that's okay. He'd do this similar to a technique utilized by a former employee of mine, Corky Siegel, who I played with for a number of years, and also Dr. John, the Cajun piano player. And they'd have things where they could really get raucous and loud, and then draw it to a whisper, and then to suck you in. They'd get your attention, they'd get you quiet, so you would really pay attention to what he has to say. Great speaker. He'd engage. As good a speaker as he was a listener. He was a really good listener, especially when we both came down with medical issues. But we didn't want to analyze it and get into the nth degree about the cooties that we shared. or we were not enjoying in the medical world. This anti-attention getter of his never failed in getting the chef to stop what she was doing to talk with John. I got to know John when he was an honored guest at Seema's and yours truly's wedding many moons ago, and periodic and episodic movable feasts at dining locations in Forest Park and Lincolnwood. And my wife was not kidding you. When he showed up and was going to be preparing, he had to prepare some of the meals at the stove, so that meant we got to back off, let the chef do his duty, and that's the only time, because normally I have to abdicate the throne when my wife's in the kitchen. I'm just too clumsy now, and I get in the way, and I roadblock creativity as well as just getting ready to eat. So, for me, it's the dugout. His roasted root vegetables and exotically spiced fruit salad were tasty indeed, and he voraciously destroyed whatever protein source Seema created. His favorite part of every meal was a scratch dessert that she'd create as well. And my wife, she's really good. I'm living proof of how good a cook my wife is. One time he called and I launched into a brief soliloquy before he could say a word. I told him this statement, and I wanted to see if he was well read on the hit writers or what was happening and things. Excuse me, there's one salty word in this soliloquy. It's going to take all but 10 seconds. The music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free, and good men die like dogs. There's also a negative side. And so he said, Bobby, that sounds familiar. Who is it? I said, it's the gonzo journalist. It's Hunter Thompson. He says, I'm going to remember that. And he remembers things categorically. He had a Rolodex in his brain about all his travels, experiences, things he had to read, re-education on stuff. The guy was an open sponge. His enjoyment wasn't on sports. His enjoyment was sharing information and energy with other people. He loved the energy. He loved to be entertained. He loved to have his leg pulled, and I'm a champion leg puller. John especially liked it and asked about the author. I was a tad happy that he'd never heard it before, and he asked if the assessment was true. I told him, yes, John, almost, but not quite invariably.
Next, we'll welcome Holly Cahan to share some words of memory.
So I'm Holly Cahan. I say that because I want to know all of your names too. John spoke of all of you, to all of us. He sends his regards, gives us your regards, we send my regards to you. You're all names in this fabric that was John and John's many relationships. And my head's swirling a bit because as I'm listening to each person, I'm like nodding. I'm just like nodding constantly. And yeah, he wrote handwritten thank you notes in addition to the cards. And the fruit salad, the legendary fruit salad, often ginger, sometimes cumin, sometimes cardamom, sometimes pink peppercorns, sometimes all of the above. It was just sort of whatever seemed to be a good idea in the moment. I think that everywhere on this planet that John traveled to, he had friends he stayed with. John knew about nurturing friendships. He involved himself in phone conversations no matter where he was or in what time zone. going to go off script for a second because that reminds me that I had the unfortunate experience of getting COVID when I was in Budapest, Hungary. And so I was sequestered by myself in a room for 6 days in a hotel in a place I didn't know anyone. But because of the time zone and because of our ridiculous sleep habits, John and I would talk to each other almost whether it was my morning, his morning, I don't even remember anymore, but every day. And yes, my adventure did begin right then and there. And it maintained its status as an adventure rather than something that happened to me. John listened. He was a fantastic listener. I always felt heard. On so many occasions, we'd sit in my kitchen after having made and photographed some rather remarkable dinner together. We would talk for hours. That was easy to do with John. Often he'd listen for quite a while, and then he'd come up with a 4 or 5 word comment that would completely reorient my perspective. He could both ground me and inspire me, leading to many accomplishments I might not have made without his input. John's caring extended beyond just the individual who was his friend. He asked about and cared for each of my children and even my grandchildren. He often had his own phone conversations with them, always offering his generous guidance. I imagine he did that with your family and friends as well. John may not have created a family of his own, but each and every one of his friends, siblings, nieces, and nephews were woven together by John into the family that is here right now, today, honoring that man he continued to become. Thank you.
Judy Hale, share some words.
Well, thank you very much for including me. I met John in 1979, and you've already captured much of it, but over those years, I watched him grow. You know, some people, they come into this world and they know what they want to do. He was forever on the journey to define what he wanted to do. So I was privileged to be part of that journey with him, if you will. It was in 79. I had started my company in 74, so in 79, I was still into, I wonder what's around the corner. So I would meet him in these meetings. He would be there and I'd be there. And we were both on this journey to kind of find out who we were, what we were about, what's going on in the world. And it was very interesting. Let me pause for a moment. In those 40 years that I knew him, 45, I watched him grow. He watched me grow too, but we won't go there. But I watched him grow. I watched him find his own way. But in all of that, he was true to himself, which is what you've talked about. His more recent book is called My Prism, and I think that really captures him. Each of us saw him through a different window. But we collectively put that window together, we'll get a sense of who the whole is. Well, that book talked about that we bring a perspective to everything. He was definitely purposeful. He always had an eye on you, not just himself. So he was always concerned about the impact on you. I mean, it was a constant in all that 45 years, okay? And yet, in that process, he was trying to figure out how he can contribute, make a difference, be his part, become who he is, and things like that. So I had the privilege, observing and somewhat participating in that journey. Some of you may know he once worked for me. He was an employee. Some of you, he was there when my son died. He was there when my mother died. He was there when a divorce, a marriage, you name it. But he was, you've already captured it, he brought a perspective. And I knew when I called him, he would give me a new window through which to look at my experience and what was going on. So I love the fact that my prism really captures him in many ways, okay? He talked to me shortly before this. We lost him because he wanted to talk about how to resurrect his consulting business. And so we talked about his steps and what he can do and his writing and going forward. And so he still had he still wanted to contribute. He still wanted to touch the world. He still wanted to touch you. And he was figuring out how to do that. So it was very positive. And for me, and perhaps for you, it was encouraging because most of us would have given up by then, you know? Most of us said, oh my, too bad, so sad. No, he was still saying, how can I contribute? So I felt very privileged to have him as a friend over these years. I felt particularly privileged to see him grow and develop as he continued to find new ways to contribute and be himself. And I certainly felt privileged because he enhanced my life as a friend. Thank you.
We'll hear some final words from John's brother, Rabbi Jeffrey Lazar.
You're seeing me move kind of quickly today. There are glaciers that move even faster than I do. And I've made peace with the folks at Time Lapse Photography who let me know in no uncertain terms that they did not have the time to follow me from point A to point B. First of all, thanks to all of you for being here and for your love and support. I believe that it's safe to say that if we had our druthers, we would rather be someplace else than being here today. Because John's vitality and energy were still in our midst. The reality is that we've come together today for three really important reasons. One, to mourn the loss of John. For an all too brief 77 years, he graced the earth and brightened the lives of those who knew him. Secondly, we are here to celebrate. We're here to celebrate John's life and what it meant to all of you, to us, to his family. To acknowledge that John, who, among other things, was an amazing human being and an accomplished educator. And third, we're here to share memories. And the memories that we've heard here today have just been really exquisite.
They're reflective of the multifacets that one finds on a diamond. You can't even begin to describe what's going on there, but all of the stories that we've heard today have been so unique and so personal. And so, in one way, this leads me to my next thought, which is there's something rather preposterous about trying to sum up a person's life in a matter of a few minutes. Somehow I suspect that what's going to happen today will be very much akin to the effects of a time-release capsule, that unbidden, there will be memories that will pop up in our minds, thoughts that will bring a smile, a tear, and those of you who had the privilege of knowing John will recall moments, and the beauty of all of this is that they come without warning. That's a gift. Memories are precious. And yes, we'd love to have a reality rather than a memory, but trust me when I tell you that the memories themselves are real. The beauteous aspect of all of this is that there's no time limit. In the next few minutes, this does remind me of a cartoon that my wife cut out of the New Yorker years ago. There was this clergy person standing in front of a congregation, and there was a caption underneath that said, "I shall be brief." Behind the clergy person was a set of golf clubs. My wife knew me all too well. My son knows me all too well. Dad, let's get to the story already. Come on. So I've been doing, some of you, if you're old enough, will remember a TV show called Leave It to Beaver. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, it ran for 6 years and portrayed this relationship between Wally and Beaver Cleaver. The two of them were separated by 5 or 6 years difference. John and I weren't separated that far apart. We were more like about 2.5 years apart. But the thing that resonated for me was the relationship that Wally and Beaver had with one another. And it reminded me of how special John's and my early relationship was. The reality is when you graduate from high school and you move out of the house, very oftentimes you don't get to see family members all that often. And then, unfortunately, that's what happened with John and me. We were separated, except during the infrequent summer vacation, and that was a time to get caught up. But one of the things that I recall, John and I used to collect baseball cards. I still have a fabulous collection. So if any of you are ever in the Boston area and would like to see the 1955 Topps set, I got it. John and I could not wait for my parents, Joni's and my parents, to leave the house, to go out for some evening, because then we could do whatever we wanted, which is often what Wally and Beaver did. We would take out I don't imagine too many of you have ever done this before, where you've used fishing poles and belts to constitute the foul lines of a baseball park. And we had these cardboard blocks, and we would configure the baseball stadium to resemble one of the different ballparks that the Cubs or the White Sox played in. So when we did Fenway Park, we had this huge left field wall, and one night, John and I turned off all the lights in the bedroom. We shared the same bedroom, and we had just this gooseneck lamp on. My father came in, and he saw, "Oh, it's a night game, huh?" So we had that, and when we got to go downstairs into the living room, and we had this enormous expanse, we could do Yankee Stadium or the Polo Grounds, which had unbelievable dimensions. When John and I shared the same bedroom together for so many years, there was this game that John invented called Underground City. And what would be involved with this was I would get out of my bed and get into his, and we would go under the covers. John would make sound effects, and we would tell this absolutely moronic, insensible story, but it was like it's just such a reward. We did that on a number of occasions. One summer, when I was home from college, our parents had rented a red Ford Mustang for us to share during the summer. And very subtle. At any rate, one of the things that John did was he got a hold of this troll about this tall, had the brightest orange hair you ever saw, and he affixed it to the dashboard. By the time the summer was over, that troll's hair was bleached white. It was just rather remarkable. John was the best man at Barbara's and my wedding, and during the course of this, Joni was one of the bridesmaids, and at the end, when the bride throws the garter to somebody, John caught it, and when I threw, if you think I can remember this, forget it. But there was a bouquet of flowers. So at any rate, Joni caught it. And so there you have John and Joni interacting, and the look on Joni's face as John gleefully slid the garter up Joni's leg is priceless. And you'll see that in the photos that Yael put together. The weekly check-ins that John and I had were priceless because when you get to my advanced age, and I've often told my students that I have fond memories of my pet dinosaur, and I actually had one student who said, "Really?" I didn't have the heart to tell him that the word gullible was not in the dictionary. At any rate, we would check in with one another, as Joni and I continued to do with each other multiple times every week. So that was a gift. One of the things that I told John about was how my wife Barbara and my son David and I would drive up to Maine for blueberry pancakes. And this sounded like something really up John's alley. Well, all the stories that we've heard about food and food preparation, et cetera, it doesn't take any kind of imagination to figure that one out. But as the saying goes, life happens while you're making plans. John had wanted to come to Boston and meet with David and I, and we would drive up to the main diner for blueberry pancakes. He had actually made reservations to fly in on May 1st, but as the saying goes, alas, that was not to be. At any rate, I want to share with you a meditation piece written by Rabbi Alvin Fine. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to old age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength and strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back, we pray, to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, from grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage to life everlasting. I will miss all of this, his brotherliness and friendship, his laughter, his support, his love, his amazing smile, his sense of humor. All that was John. Zichrono livracha. May John's memory always be a blessing. Thanks. What was mentioned earlier was that there are booklets outside that are memories of John that many of you were generous enough to share. And no, I don't, although my wife used to say, Jeffrey, if it weren't for the last minute, that you wouldn't get a lot of things done. If there are any of you who would like to share a memory of John, please send it to my email address, and we will add it to the book, and we will PDF a copy to you.
Thank you. So many beautiful memories, such a tapestry, so many perspectives, a prism, so many refracted colors of love, of presence, of joy, of gratitude, of purpose, of food, of family, of friendship. A beautiful life, beautiful life. We'll conclude our service today with two prayers. The first is a prayer called El Malei Rachamim. And as so many have mentioned, and John really lived this way, life is a journey. And in Jewish tradition, we believe that the journey actually continues, that the soul lives on. Some part of John lives on and ascends. And this is a prayer for the continued ascent, the continued journey of John's soul, that it rise higher and higher, that it rise to be reunited with God. And so all who are able are welcome to stand, and I'll recite this prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona, Al Kanfei Ashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Uteorim, Kezoar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat, Yonatan Ben Dovber, Shehalach Le'olamo, Bavor Shanachnu Mitpalalim Barat Grat Nishmato, Began Eden Tehe Menuchato, Lachein Balarachamim Yastirer Beseter Knafav Le'olamim, Vitzor B'tor Chaim Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'shalom Al Mishkavo V'numar, Amen. And in English, God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence in the lofty levels of the holy and pure who shine as the brightness of the firmament. Unto the soul of John Lazar, Yonatan ben Dovber, who has gone to his world and for whose memory we pray. May his rest be in paradise. May the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he rest in his resting place in peace. And let us respond, Amen. And we'll conclude with the mourner's Kaddish, a final prayer. The Kaddish is an enigmatic prayer. It's a prayer we recite in a year of mourning. It's a prayer we recite for those we've lost, and yet it doesn't mention loss at all. It doesn't mention the dead. It doesn't mention grief. It just talks about God and God's name and making God's name great, and it seems to be a strange prayer. My teacher, Rabbi Avi Weiss, shared with me that when someone like John, who embodies so many godly attributes, presence, compassion, intention, joy, family, love, when someone like that leaves the world, it's as if God's presence is diminished in the world. It's as if a little bit of God, because God is reflected in each and every one of us, we are all made in the image of God. And when someone whose image of godliness shone so brightly, it's like God is diminished in the world. So the Kaddish is a response. We pray that the attributes that John embodied, the divine attributes, that we pray that those are made great again, that that presence is brought back into the world. And the way we do that is by living our lives in consonance with his teachings. So by gatherings like this, telling these stories, and by going out, all of us, even the youngest among us, and taking what we've heard today and bringing that manifest into the world, we make God's name great again. We eat gadal v'gadash. We enlarge and we greaten God through the memory of John. So all who are prepared are welcome to recite the Kaddish together. I'll lead it and you can join me. Yit gadal v'gadash shemei rabbah, v'alma divrach yirutei v'amlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. V'gala v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach leolam u'me'omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha brichu. Le'elam mikol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Damiran be'oma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlam araba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav. Uyaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. You may be seated.
So immediately following the service this afternoon, There will be a gathering in our other chapel, the North Chapel, right across the lobby until 1 p.m. And then immediately following that, there will be a reception at the Rosen Household in Evanston, 2203 Bennett Avenue. The information is listed here in your service folder, and for those folks that are viewing online, that information is also on our website. At this time, I'll ask everyone to rise, and we're going to escort the family into the Shiva room. And please just give them a few moments to get adjusted into the room.